The woman at the door was the color of a person who had already decided this conversation was beneath her before it began. Not angry, exactly. Something colder than that. The specific shade of someone who has power and knows it and wants you to know it too. Cecily Moran saw it from across the restaurant floor before she even reached the host's stand. The woman, late 50s, cream blazer, the kind of handbag that doesn't have a visible logo because it doesn't need one, was speaking to a server named Patrick in a tone that wasn't raised but somehow carried to every corner of the room, the way a temperature drop carries. You feel it before you locate the source. I specifically requested the corner table. The one by the window. Not this. She gestured at the table in front of her the way someone gestures at a problem that should already have been solved. This is a table for people who didn't plan ahead. Patrick held his tablet and said nothing, which meant he was doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. Wait for a manager. Cecily set down the inventory clipboard she'd been holding and crossed the floor in 8 steps. She was the evening floor manager at Harlow, a restaurant that had spent 4 years earning a reputation for the kind of quiet precision that doesn't announce itself. No signs on the door, no social media account. The kind of place you only knew about if someone trusted you enough to tell you. Good evening. Cecily reached the host's stand with the same energy she used to do everything. Deliberate, unhurried, already 3 steps ahead. I'm Cecily, the floor manager. Can I help? The woman looked at her the way people look at someone they're deciding whether to bother addressing. Your server put me at this table. Patrick put you at a lovely table, Cecily said pleasantly. The corner window table has a party of 4 arriving in 12 minutes who've had that reservation for 6 weeks. I can offer you the alcove table. It has better light and a quieter atmosphere, or I can check with our sister location on Clement Street if you'd prefer a different setting entirely. The woman's eyes narrowed by a fraction. She'd come in ready for a fight and found, instead, a door that opened before she knocked. The alcove, she said at last. Cecily nodded. Follow me. She walked the woman to the table herself, pulled out the chair, and handed her the menu with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times and had never once made it look like a transaction. As she turned to go, the woman said without looking up, You handled that well. Cecily paused. Catherine Whitmore, the name meant nothing to Cecily then. By the end of the evening, it would mean a great deal. She found out 40 minutes later when Patrick appeared at her elbow during the middle of a tableside complication involving a dietary restriction that had not been communicated at booking. The man at table 9 is asking for you, Patrick said. Cecily finished explaining the kitchen's accommodation to the guest, gave a final nod, and made her way to table 9. The man there was somewhere in his early 40s, dark jacket, no tie, with the kind of posture that didn't perform authority because it didn't need to. He was looking out the window when she arrived, and he turned with the unhurried ease of someone who wasn't worried about his time. Harlow is a hard reservation to get, he said by way of hello. We try to make it worth the wait. He looked at her directly, the way people look when they're actually paying attention and not just performing attention. You just handled a fairly unpleasant situation at the front and turned it into something that looked effortless. I want to know how you did that. Cecily studied him for exactly 1 second. Mr. Whitmore. James Whitmore. There it was. The last name she'd heard 40 minutes ago. Mrs. Whitmore is your mother, he said. Yes? A pause the length of a breath. She and I have a complicated relationship with the concept of good tables. He said it with a dryness that wasn't cruel, just precise. I watched from the door. He nodded toward the entrance. I arrived early. Cecily kept her expression even. I offered her what the situation allowed. You gave her a way to change her mind without looking like she changed her mind. He tilted his head slightly. That's a specific skill. It's just hospitality. James Whitmore looked at her the way someone looks when the word just is doing too much work in a sentence. I have a meeting with your general manager tomorrow morning, he said. James Whitmore, Whitmore Culinary Group. We're in discussion about Harlow's expansion. The room continued around them, silver on linen, candlelight, the low hum of 24 conversations happening at once. Cecily let none of it show on her face. She had suspected Harlow's owner was in conversations with someone. She hadn't known who. He's on the 2nd floor, she said. I can send word that you've arrived. Tonight, if you'd like. Tomorrow's fine. He picked up his glass, but thank you, he said it. Without looking back at the window, he was looking at her. Cecily went back to the floor. She spent the next 2 hours telling herself she wasn't thinking about it. The second time they crossed paths was the following afternoon, in the dry storage room on the lower level where Cecily had gone to reconcile a discrepancy in the week's produce order. She was comparing numbers on a printed sheet against what was actually on the shelf, a task that required silence and concentration, and the kind of patience that comes from being right about something you can't prove yet. James Whitmore appeared in the doorway with his jacket draped over his arm, and the look of someone who had just come from a meeting and was following a direction he'd been given by someone on the floor. "They told me the manager was down here." Cecily looked up from her clipboard. She did not appear surprised because she wasn't. Things like this happened at restaurants. People wandered into back spaces expecting a certain kind of deference and found instead a person doing math. "Floor manager," she said. "The general manager is still upstairs, right?" He looked at the shelves, then at the clipboard. "What's wrong with the order?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, not out of uncertainty but out of the specific calculation of whether to answer honestly or professionally. "Honestly, one. We're consistently short on one supplier's dry goods for the past 3 weeks," she said. "The invoice matches what they claim to have sent, but what's on the shelf doesn't match what's being used. Either the kitchen is pulling from the wrong shelf and recording it incorrectly, or someone in the supply chain is quietly shorting us." James was quiet for a moment. "You've been tracking this for 3 weeks? 2.5. I wanted to be sure before I brought it to anyone." He leaned against the door frame and looked at her with that same attention as the night before. "I found enough to take upstairs tomorrow," he almost smiled. "Almost. Go ahead then. Don't let me interrupt." Cecily went back to her clipboard. He stayed in the doorway for another 20 seconds longer than was necessary, and then he went back upstairs without asking any more questions. What she didn't see was him pausing at the base of the staircase, looking back at the storage room doorway, and deciding something without announcing it. The third time was the following week, in the elevator of the building that held Harlow's administrative offices, 4 blocks from the restaurant. Cecily had come in on her day off because the supplier situation required a formal written report, and she wanted to use the office printer rather than her home one, which had been acting unreliable since October, and which she kept meaning to replace. James stepped in on the 3rd floor with a folder under his arm, and the particular expression of someone who had just come from a meeting that had resolved something he hadn't expected. The doors closed. "You came in on your day off," he said. "How did you? Your general manager mentioned it when I passed his office." He was looking at the floor indicator. "You wrote the supplier report yourself." "It was my observation. It seemed right that I write it. Most managers would have delegated." "Most managers weren't the ones who noticed the discrepancy." James turned to look at her, and there was something in the look that she filed away and didn't examine right then, because the elevator was 12 floors and this wasn't the time. The lobby of the office building had that late afternoon light, pale gold through tall windows, the kind that made everything look briefly kinder than it was. "Cecily," he said as the doors opened. He said her name the way people say something when they've been carrying it for a bit. She stepped out first. She spent the rest of the afternoon writing her report with the specific focus of someone who was not thinking about anything else. The note arrived 3 days later. Paper, not email. The Whitmore Culinary Group letterhead, the kind with embossed text and the quiet confidence of a company that doesn't need to show off. The handwriting was deliberate, left-leaning. "I'd like your professional opinion on a project. Thursday, 6 p.m., 801 Strand Street, 2nd floor. J. Whitmore." Cecily read it twice. Then she set it on the counter and went to make coffee. Her roommate, a physical therapist named Dana, who had the admirable quality of asking questions nobody else thought to ask, looked at the note from across the kitchen. "Who's J. Whitmore?" Cecily poured the coffee. "Whitmore Culinary Group. They're in discussions with Harlow." Dana considered this. "And he handwrote a note to the floor manager? It's a professional request. On paper." Dana said it with the absolute serenity of someone who had already reached a conclusion. "Nobody writes notes on paper for professional requests. They send a calendar invite." Cecily took her coffee to the other room. On Thursday at 6, she arrived at 801 Strand Street with a notebook and the specific energy of someone who wasn't going to read anything into this that wasn't there. The 2nd floor was a half-renovated event space. Raw brick on the north wall, new flooring still in its protective wrap, steel beams exposed overhead. On the south side, floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the evening light sat on the bay like something poured there on purpose. James was standing near the windows with a rolled-up set of plans in one hand and no blazer, sleeves pushed to his elbows, looking for the first time like a person rather than a representative of something. "You came in professional attire," he said. "You said it was professional. I said I needed an opinion." He looked at her sideways. "Close enough." Cecily opened her notebook. "Show me the space." They walked for an hour. The project was a private dining and event venue, anchored to the waterfront, intended to become a flagship for the Whitmore Culinary Group's West Coast expansion. He explained the concept. She listened, asked questions, and disagreed when she disagreed, with the calm efficiency of someone who wasn't waiting for permission. "That partition cuts the sightline to the water," she said, pointing at the plan on his phone. "You'll spend every event managing the perception of people in the back of the room who feel like second-class guests. It's a necessary structural support. Have you verified that with your engineer, or has your architect just been telling you it is?" James looked up from the phone. "Because if it's structural, you design around it. If it's not, you take it down." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll check." "You should." He put the phone away, analytical expression she was starting to recognize, the one that meant he was paying real attention and had stopped performing the act of it. "You speak like someone with a specific grievance against unnecessary walls." Cecily looked out at the water. "I ran a restaurant for 3 years in a space where the landlord refused to modify anything. Beautiful bones, wrong layout, and we spent every service working around a problem that should have been fixed before we opened." She paused. "I learned early that the bones of a space either serve the experience or fight it. There's no neutral." James stood beside her and looked at the same view for a moment. "What happened to the restaurant?" "We had a great 3 years, and then the lease wasn't renewed." She said it the way people say things they've made peace with. "The landlord sold the building. We scattered." She turned back to the plan. "But I know what this space wants to be, and it's not this layout. Tell me." She did. 20 minutes, specific, practical, the kind of suggestions that came who had run the numbers in her head before she said them out loud. James listened without interrupting, which was rarer than it should have been. When she finished, he said, "Write it up. I want it before." Friday, Cecily nodded, capping her pen. That's when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression didn't change exactly, but it shifted. The way a light shifts when a cloud passes. "I need to take this." She pointed to her notebook and mouthed, "I'll head out." She turned and walked toward the staircase. She was halfway down when she heard his voice, lower now, carrying the specific flatness of someone managing a conversation they didn't want to have. "No," he said, "not that again." A pause. "Tell him I'll call him back." She kept walking. She didn't hear the rest. What Cecily didn't know, couldn't have known, was that she had just walked past a window on the ground floor, and that 2 men inside the neighboring coffee shop had watched her cross the parking lot. One of them was James's business partner, a man named Roland, who was in the middle of making a bet that was equal parts cruel and casual, the way that kind of thing usually starts. $100, Roland said, says she figures out who he is before Thursday dinner. The other man, whose name was Brett, and who had the instincts of someone who has watched too many of these situations, said, 200 says when she does, she walks. They clinked their glasses. Neither of them lowered their voices. The parking lot was not as empty as they assumed. Cecily heard it standing 8 feet from the coffee shop's propped-open door, keys already in her hand, the words landing in the order they landed. $100. Figures out who he is. Thursday dinner when she does, she walks. She stood still for 3 seconds. The bay made its usual sound. A car passed on the street. She processed what she'd heard with the same focused calm she brought to the produce discrepancy. Then she got into her car and drove home. She didn't sleep well. She wasn't the type to pretend otherwise. At least not to herself. The word who was the one that stayed with her. She already knew James was with Whitmore Culinary Group. She knew about the expansion, the meeting with her GM, the financial weight of what was being discussed, but who he is was a bigger phrase than his business card. She went in on Friday and asked a colleague in administration named Peter, who knew everything about everyone and had never once been asked to be discreet about it, one question. What exactly is James Whitmore's role at Whitmore Culinary Group? Peter looked at her with the expression of someone who is surprised to be asked something he assumed everyone already knew. He's not just an executive, Cecily. He owns it. He and his family. His father started it. James took over about 6 years ago after. He paused. After what? Peter lowered his voice slightly. There was a whole situation with the inheritance. His father stepped back but retained shares. There's a brother involved. It's one of those family business setups that looks clean from the outside and isn't. Cecily absorbed this. Thank you. She went back to her office and sat at her desk for 4 minutes without doing anything. Then she typed up the space assessment she promised, sent it to James, and spent the rest of the afternoon managing a linen order and pretending the ceiling was interesting. It was a private event at Harlow. 12 guests, investors and partners of Whitmore Culinary Group. Cecily was on the floor as she always was. She was also, for the first time in 4 years of working there, acutely aware of every word she said and to whom. She crossed paths with Roland near the bar. She recognized him from the parking lot. He didn't know that. He looked at her the way men look when they're deciding if you're worth talking to. "Outstanding service tonight," he said, with the tone of someone who thinks a compliment is a tip. "Thank you. Is there something I can get you?" He smiled at something she hadn't said. "Just a water." She got him the water, moved on, and filed his face permanently. James found her at 9:15 near the back window, during a rare 3-minute gap in the floor's rhythm. "May I?" He stopped beside her. She looked at him, at the room, at the view through the window, the city going on without any opinion about the conversation that was about to happen. "You're the owner," she said. "It's your table, your room, your restaurant, I think, at this point." James studied her. Something changed in his expression. "You found out a few days ago. You didn't say anything. I was working." It didn't seem like the time. He was quiet for a moment. "I should have told you myself, yes. I kept James." She said his name with the specific weight of someone who has already done the math and isn't interested in the longer version. "You kept finding reasons to wait. I understand that. What I don't understand is the part where your business partners are making bets about me in a parking lot with the window open." The silence that followed had the quality of something that needed a moment to settle. He didn't try to deflect. "I found out about the bet the night of the walkthrough after you left." His voice was even, but the evenness required effort. "I told them to end it. I should have told you. That's on me." "Yes, it is. I'm sorry." Cecily looked at him for a long moment. She wasn't testing him. She was just deciding what the apology was worth. She had found over the years that apologies were like the restaurant's sourcing. The quality was in the follow-through. "I accept that," she said, "but I need you to know that my name is not a side bet. I work in this industry. I have a reputation that I built myself, in a field where women in management spend years getting taken seriously, and I will not have that reduced to a punchline in a parking lot." James met her eyes directly. "It won't happen again. Not the bar." He paused. "Fair." They stood looking out at the city for a moment, the noise of the event a comfortable distance behind them. "I still want your opinion on the Strand Street space," he said. "You have my written report. I mean the ongoing one." He looked at her sideways. "You see things other people miss." She didn't answer right away. The walkie-talkie on her belt crackled, someone in the kitchen with a question. She answered it, gave a direction, clicked off. "We'll see," she said, and walked back to the floor. What she didn't notice, because she was focused on the table that needed attention near the east wall, was Catherine Whitmore, James's mother, seated at the far end of the investor table, watching her go with an expression that contained several things at once. Assessment and something that looked, from a certain angle, like recognition. Sunday morning came with the particular quiet of a city that hasn't started yet. Cecily was in her kitchen with coffee and the weekend farmers market hall when her phone rang. "Unknown number, San Francisco area code," she answered. "Miss Moran." The voice was female, professional, and careful in the way of someone who speaks for a living. "My name is Patricia Keene from Whitmore Culinary Group's communications office. There's been an incident involving a vendor relationship, and your name has come up in connection with a document discrepancy. We'd like you to come in this morning, if possible." Cecily set down her coffee mug. "What kind of document?" "The supplier report you submitted last week. Some of the figures in your report appear in a competing vendor's proposal that was received this morning. The timestamps are," she chose her word carefully, unusual. Cecily was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "When were the figures accessed?" "We're still looking at that." 10 o'clock? She was there at 9:52. The conference room on Whitmore Culinary Group's 14th floor had a view of the bay and the quiet confidence of a room where real decisions were made. James was at one end of the table. Beside him, a man she didn't know with a legal pad. Roland sat across, and he had, for the first time since she'd encountered him, the look of someone who was not comfortable with where he was sitting. Catherine Whitmore was in a chair near the window. Cecily walked in. She sat down without waiting to be asked. The man with the legal pad, Harold Park, she'd learned, internal legal counsel, opened a folder. "The supplier report you submitted on Thursday contained specific pricing projections for 3 vendors. Those same projections appeared this morning in a competing quote submitted to us through an outside firm. The quotes were submitted at 11:48 p.m. Thursday. Our access logs show your credentials were used to open the file at 11:43 p.m. Cecily looked at the folder. Then she looked up. "At 11:43 p.m. Thursday," she said, "I was at Harlow. The investor dinner didn't end until 11:15. I took the bus home, the 38 Geary, which I take every Thursday. The transit app on my phone will show a fare payment at 11:22. She looked at Harold Park directly. "I did not access that file after I submitted it. My involvement with that report ended when I sent it." The credentials used my login. Yes. She kept her voice measured. From where? Harold Park looked at his notes. The Whitmore Group administrative portal. From an IP address registered to this building. Which room? 14th floor. Communications suite. Cecily turned to Patricia Keene, who had delivered the call that morning and who was now seated 2 chairs to the right with the stillness of someone who has been hoping not to be looked at. The communications suite, Cecily said, is 2 floors below us. She said it to the room, not to anyone's person. I've never had reason to be in the communications suite. My report was submitted through the standard employee portal. I don't have administrative access to whatever system was used for the competing quote. She opened her bag and placed her phone on the table, transit receipt. She turned the screen to face Harold Park. Time-stamped, geolocated. I was on the 38 Geary at 11:22. She looked at the table. Someone used my login from a room in this building while I was on a bus heading home. That's not an internal breach. That's a setup. The room went quiet. James, who had not spoken since she'd walked in, said, "Harold, give us a minute." Cecily stood. She looked at him. "You can say it here," she said in the same tone she had used in the restaurant that first night. "Whatever you want to say, it can be said in front of the same people who heard the accusation." James held her gaze. Then he nodded. He turned to Harold Park. "I want a full audit of the communication suite access log, security footage of the 14th floor between 10 p.m. and midnight Thursday. And I want it before end of business today," Harold wrote quickly. James turned to Roland. Roland, for the first time, looked at the table rather than at any one person. The thing about Cecily Moran was that she didn't shout. She had the quality which she'd developed over years of managing restaurant floors, of being more present when she was quiet. More there, somehow, when other people would have raised their voices. This made her, in situations like this, impossible to dismiss. She stood up. She gathered her phone. She put it back in her bag. "I'll cooperate with whatever you need," she said to Harold Park. "But if the audit confirms what I know it will confirm, I expect the same transparency from this office that you just required of me." She looked at the room, not at James specifically, at all of them. She left. She was halfway down the elevator when her hands allowed themselves one small tremble which she noticed and then set aside because the ground floor lobby was in view and she wasn't going to let a lobby see that. She called Dana from the sidewalk. "Tell me something normal," Cecily said. Dana, who understood her completely, said, "I had cereal for dinner last night. 2 kinds, mixed." "Thank you. What happened?" "Someone used my login to leak my own report." A pause. "Oh, those people, yeah. Do you know who? I have a theory." Dana didn't ask her to share it. She said, "Do you want to come over? I have cereal." Cecily looked at the bay on the horizon, visible at the end of the street in that particular way that San Francisco does it, where you can see the water between buildings without going anywhere near it. She knew, standing there, that the next step was finding the answer before someone else could frame it. She went home. She pulled out her laptop, and she spent 3 hours cross-referencing something she had noticed during the walkthrough at 801 Strand Street. The vendor whose figures had appeared in the competing quote was the same supplier who had been shorting Harlow's dry goods for 2.5 months. Not a coincidence. A thread. She wrote it up. She sent it to Harold Park at 8 p.m. with a note that said, "This may be relevant to the broader picture." Then she went to bed and slept for 7 hours. The audit results came in at 11:15 the following morning. She found out indirectly when James called. She almost didn't answer. She answered. The footage shows Roland entering the communications suite at 11:38 Thursday, he said without preamble. He was logged out at 11:54. The access to your file happened at 11:43 within that window. Cecily sat with that for a moment. Harold found it this morning. Roland has been running 50 figures to a third-party competitor for 4 months. Your report was the most recent, the shortest silence. The dry goods issue at Harlow was the beginning of it. 4 months, she said. I know. He said nothing more. She waited. I owe you more than an apology, James said at last. You owe me an explanation, she said it without heat, about what the full picture is, the company structure, what Roland's actually was, why this became a situation where someone felt threatened enough by a floor manager's report to plant evidence. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that holds more than the words around it. That's a longer conversation, he said. I've got time. The cafe was small. The kind of place that had been on the same block for 20 years without trying to become something different. Formica counters, handwritten specials on a chalkboard, a piece of banana bread under a glass dome that looked like it was taken very seriously by everyone involved. James ordered 2 coffees without asking, which Cecily noticed and let go because she did actually want coffee. Whitmore Culinary Group started with my father, he said when they sat down. He didn't lead with that. He arrived at it the way someone arrives at the real starting point after a moment of deciding whether to begin there or somewhere safer. 28 years ago, 2 restaurants, then 4, then 12. He turned his cup in his hands. I joined at 32, spent 3 years in operations before he gave me the title of CEO. What he gave me was the title, the actual company, the ownership structure. That's different. His voice was even, but the evenness had edges. 60% is split between my father and my older brother, who has never worked a day in the business and has very specific ideas about how it should be run. Cecily looked at him across the table. Roland, he worked for my brother first, James said. He came in through that relationship. I inherited him when I took over, and I kept him because he was effective. He paused. I didn't look closely enough at what he was effective at. Cecily held her coffee cup. Your brother wanted the company to look bad on your watch. James looked at her with that expression again. The one she'd seen in the storage room, in the elevator, on the pier. The one that meant he was noting something he hadn't expected to find. You got there faster than my lawyer. I've had practice with bad structures. She said it simply. So Roland was the mechanism. Roland thought he was protecting a future where he had a seat at the table that he wouldn't have under me. She sat with that. Is your brother going to keep doing this? I don't know yet. His jaw tightened, just slightly. He and my father are talking. My father is, the word seemed to cost him something. Complicated. In what way? He built something, James said. He's proud of it. He has opinions about who should be trusted with it, and those opinions don't always track with the evidence. He took a breath. He called me last night after the audit came out. The call lasted 43 minutes. We agreed on very little. We agreed that Roland is out. That's something. It's not enough. Cecily nodded slowly. What else are you carrying? He looked at her. She said it directly without softening it, and he seemed to find in the directness something that was easier to answer than a gentler version would have been. That if this company implodes on my watch, it's because I wasn't enough, he said. That my father built it and my brother could dismantle it, and I'm standing in the middle trying to make something that actually works. And sometimes I can't tell if I'm building or just holding the walls up. The cafe continued around them. Someone ordered the banana bread. The person behind the counter said something that made the room briefly laugh. The walls aren't the problem, Cecily said. She looked at him. You've been spending your energy on the structure when the issue is the foundation. What do you actually want the company to be? James stared at her. Not what your father built. Not what your brother wants to sell. What you'd make if neither of them were in the room. He was quiet for a long time. That, he said finally, is the first time anyone has asked me that. They sat with the question between them for a moment. The afternoon light came in sideways through the cafe window, the particular honeygold of a San Francisco day that doesn't announce itself until it's already there. Is that what the Strand Street project is? She asked. Part of it. And the rest? He looked at her, figuring out what I want instead of what I inherited. Cecily held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee. That sounds like a longer project than one renovation. Yes, he said. It does. She almost smiled. Almost. The next 3 weeks had a different quality. Roland's removal was handled by the legal department with the efficiency of a company that had been preparing documentation since the audit called twice. The second time, Cecily's phone rang at 7 in the morning, unknown Seattle area code, and she answered it because she had been half expecting it. Moran, the voice said. My name is Stephen Whitmore. I believe you know who I am. I know of you, Cecily said. What can I do for you? I want to be clear that Roland was not acting with my direct authorization. That's useful information for the lawyers. Cecily put the kettle on. Why are you telling me? A pause. Because I understand you've had a significant influence on my brother recently. I've given him a professional opinion on a building layout. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. She watched the kettle. Mr. Whitmore, I don't have a role in your family's business structure. If you want to talk to James, call James. I've tried. Try again, she said. Leave a message. He listens to them. Then, is he worth it? The question came with an edge that was trying to be casual. Cecily considered the question with the same attention she gave the ones that didn't come with an agenda. He's honest when it would be easier not to be, she said. In my experience, that's where the answer to your question starts. She hung up. She called James. She told him his brother had called. She gave him a one-sentence summary. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Did you defend me? No, she said. I told him to call you. He laughed. The real one, the one she'd heard for the first time at the Strand Street walkthrough, when she'd said something dry about unnecessary walls. Brief, genuine, the kind that happened before the decision to allow it. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. Talk to your brother. He did. The conversation, she knew from James, lasted 50 minutes and settled nothing definitively, and opened the first real door that had been closed between them for 4 years. She found out on a Tuesday afternoon when James showed up at the restaurant 10 minutes before her shift, with the particular expression of someone who has done something difficult and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. He talked, James said, actually talked. Not about the company, about what he wanted and didn't get and didn't know how to ask for. His jaw was loose in the way it got when he was tired. 40 years of a bad dynamic and 20 minutes of actual honesty. She looked at him. Did it help? I don't know yet. He looked at her. But I think it might have been the first time either of us was actually in the room. Cecily nodded. That's not nothing, no. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved to her face in that way that didn't perform anything. I need to say something. She waited. I should have been honest with you from the first time we spoke. About who I was, about what the company situation looked like, about the fact that Roland was a problem I hadn't solved. He said all of this the way someone delivers a report, carefully, in the right order. You walked into a situation that was already compromised and you handled it better than anyone had a right to expect. And when it turned on you, you defended yourself alone because I wasn't fast enough to defend you first. She looked at the floor, then back at him. That's accurate, I know. He held her gaze. I'm sorry. Completely, specifically, for all of it. The restaurant was quiet around them. It was the hour before service when everything was in place and nothing had started yet. The light at this time of day came through the kitchen pass-through in a thin line, warm and without apology. I accept that, she said. She meant it. But I want you to know what the actual cost was. She kept her voice even. I've worked in this industry for 11 years. My reputation is the thing I carry with me from job to job. When you let a situation escalate before you addressed it, the cost wasn't just mine to have a difficult week. It was the risk that the people in that conference room would make a permanent assumption about who I am. That's not recoverable with an audit. I understand that. Good. Then you know why it mattered. He nodded slowly. What can I do now? You're already doing it, she said. She meant that too. They stood in the quiet for a moment that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. Just honest. He took a breath. There's a dinner on Friday. The Strand Street project team. Engineers, the architect, a few investors. I'd like you to be there. Not as Harlow's floor manager. As what? As someone who told me the partition wasn't necessary. His voice had the dryness she'd come to expect, but, behind it, something more direct. I checked with the engineer. You were right. Of course I was, she said. He almost smiled. 8 o'clock. I'll be there. She was in a jacket the color of deep water that she'd had for 2 years and only worn twice because she'd never found the right occasion. Dana had said, when she walked out the door, "That's the occasion jacket." James saw her from across the room and stopped talking mid-sentence. The man he was talking to turned to see what had interrupted him and then seemed to understand the interruption without needing it explained. Cecily walked to the group, shook hands, introduced herself, and spent the next 2 hours being the most useful person in the room. Not because she tried to be, but because the space genuinely needed what she saw, and she had stopped being careful about saying so. Catherine Whitmore found her near the window at 9:45. You remembered me from the restaurant, the older woman said. You remembered me too, Cecily said. I've been watching you for 20 minutes. Catherine held her glass with the ease of someone who had attended a great many of these evenings. You disagree with people and they come around. That's a skill most people spend whole careers trying to develop. It's mostly just specificity. Cecily looked at her. If you know exactly what's wrong, disagreeing doesn't require volume. Catherine looked at her with a very particular expression. My son told me about the conference room. I assumed he had. He also told me about the partition. What did he say? Catherine smiled. He said he should have listened to you 3 weeks earlier, and that his architect had been wrong and too expensive to admit it. Cecily didn't smile, but something settled. He's building something, Catherine said, with the weight of someone who had watched the building for a long time and wasn't sure what it was becoming. I thought for years that what he was building was what my husband started. She looked out the window. I don't think that anymore. What do you think it is now? Cecily asked. I think it's what he would have started himself if he'd had the chance. Catherine turned and looked at her directly, the way both Whitmore men did when they were done performing, which is different, harder probably, but better, eventually. Cecily held her gaze. She wasn't sure what to say, so she said nothing, which turned out to be the right thing. The walkthrough ended cleared out over the following 30 minutes. And by 11, the second floor of 801 Strand was nearly empty. James found her near the window where the partition had been removed that week. a clean gap in the wall that let the view through unbroken from one end of the room to the other. "You were right about the wall," he said. "You already told me that, I know." He stood beside her. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was deciding how to say the thing he actually wanted to say. "I want to ask you something." She waited. "When the Strand Street project opens, I want you involved, not as a consultant on a single layout." He turned to face her. "I want you as the operating director, not on the floor, at the level where the decisions get made." Cecily looked at him. "I also want—" He paused, which he almost never did. "I want to be honest about what else I'm asking." He met her eyes. "I want to stop finding reasons to and start having a reason, a real one." He said it plainly, without framing, the way someone delivers information they trust the other person to handle. The room was quiet. The bay was out there past the glass, doing what it always did. She looked at him for a long moment. "The operating director part," she said. "That's based on what you saw?" "Yes. Not on anything else." "Yes, then I'd want to see the full structure first. Ownership, your brother's stake, your father's involvement." She held his gaze. "I don't step into something without knowing what I'm stepping into." "That's fair." He nodded. "I'll have Harold send you everything by Monday." She turned back to the window. "And the other thing." He waited. She let the quiet hold for a moment, not to make him uncertain, just to make sure what she said was exactly what she meant. "I don't need to be managed," she said. "If I'm wrong, tell me. If something changes, tell me first. If your family situation creates a complication that touches me, I hear it from you before I hear it from anyone else. Always. And if you start writing notes on paper to summon me to empty buildings at 6 in the evening," he almost smiled, "I'll continue to do that." She turned to face him. "That's the part I've already made peace with. The kiss happened the way the right things do when they've been building long enough. Not staged, not sudden, just the logical conclusion of standing close enough to someone who sees you clearly and choosing, finally, not to stand apart." From the landing below, a member of the engineering team who had been retrieving a forgotten jacket looked up at exactly the wrong moment, went very still, and then walked quickly back down the stairs with the expression of someone who had witnessed something that was absolutely none of his business and very glad he had. The Strand Street project opened 4 months later on a Saturday morning that offered the kind of sky San Francisco occasionally produces with no warning and no apology. Clear, luminous, the light coming off the water in long horizontal sheets. The partition was gone. The view ran unobstructed from the north wall to the bay. Cecily stood at the edge of the deck in a jacket the color of dark water, looking at what the space had become. Behind her 60 guests, investors, vendors, the project team, 2 food writers who didn't know they were the same person in different fonts, moved through the rooms that had been designed, finally, the way they should have been from the beginning. James found her at the railing. "You're not inside," he said. "I will be." She was looking at the water. "I wanted to see it from here first." He stood beside her. After a moment, "The engineer sent me a note this morning. He said the structural load calculations he ran on the partition showed it was non-essential." He looked at her sideways. He phrased it as new information. Cecily said nothing. "You've been right about more things than is statistically likely," James said. "I've been observant for longer than you've known me." He turned to face her. He was holding an envelope, she noticed. Small, cream-colored, her name written on the front in the same left-leaning handwriting she'd first seen on letterhead 6 months ago. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. "What is this?" "Open it." She did inside. A single-sheet, formal Whitmore Culinary Group header. A letter of agreement between the company and Strand Hospitality Consulting, a firm she had registered 3 weeks ago on the advice of a lawyer Dana had recommended. "Operating Director, Food and Beverage Experience Division," she read. "Effective upon the opening of the Strand Street venue." She looked up. "Dana's lawyer filed the consulting firm paperwork last Tuesday." "I know. Harold told me." He kept his face almost neutral. "You filed before I asked. I saw it coming." She looked at the agreement. "You backdated the contract. The date reflects when the decision was made." He held her gaze. "Which was after the walkthrough, after the partition question. I just took longer to write it down." She folded the document carefully. She put it back in the envelope. "You could have told me," she said. "I wanted you to know it existed independent of anything else." He said it simply. "Before Friday, before the dinner, before I asked you anything personal, I wanted there to be a record that I saw what you were before I needed you to know I saw it." The bay continued behind him. The sky continued above him. 60 people continued inside. Cecily held the envelope. "The wall was a mistake," she said finally. "I know. The fact that you listened when I said so is the only reason I'm standing here." He held her gaze. "I know that too." She tucked the envelope into her jacket pocket. She looked out at the water one more time, at the unobstructed view, at the space that had become what it was supposed to be. Then she turned and walked back inside, and he walked beside her, and the room received them with the particular warmth of a place that has finally gotten the layout right.